At 11:43 p.m. on September 14, 2023, security cameras captured Thomas Richardson's black sedan pulling into the First National Bank parking lot for the 15th time that month. He thought no one would notice the $2.1 million he was quietly moving between accounts. They thought they'd get away with the perfect crime. Thomas Richardson had the kind of reputation that made clients feel their money was safer than Fort Knox. For 12 years, he'd served as Senior Vice President of Wealth Management at First National Bank in Riverside, California, managing portfolios worth over $400 million. His corner office displayed 23 industry awards, photos with 3 governors, and thank you letters from hundreds of grateful clients who trusted him with their life savings. But success wasn't enough for Richardson. The 47-year-old father of 3 lived in a $2.8 million estate in the hills overlooking the city. His wife Margaret drove a Tesla Model S, his twin daughters attended private school at $30,000 per year each, and the family took annual vacations to Europe. To everyone who knew him, Thomas Richardson embodied the American dream achieved through hard work and integrity. What they didn't know was that maintaining this lifestyle required more money than his $180,000 salary could provide. Richardson's colleagues at First National would later describe him as meticulous, trustworthy, and the last person you'd suspect. He arrived at the office every morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, stayed until at least 6 p.m., and never missed a client meeting. During lunch breaks, he mentored junior employees, sharing wisdom about ethical wealth management and building relationships based on trust. His victims trusted him completely. Eleanor Martinez, 78, had been Richardson's client for 8 years. The retired nurse had saved $1.2 million over 40 years of night shifts and careful budgeting. She visited Richardson's office monthly, bringing homemade cookies and treating him like the son she never had. Thomas always made me feel so secure about my future, she would later tell investigators through tears. Robert Chen, 65, owned 3 successful restaurants in Riverside before selling them and entrusting his $2.8 million retirement fund to Richardson's management. He showed me charts, projections, everything looked perfect, Chen recalled. I told my wife we could finally relax. We were fools. James and Patricia Williams, both 72, had worked double shifts at the aerospace plant for 35 years, saving every penny possible. Their $1.9 million nest egg represented a lifetime of sacrifice, delayed vacations, second-hand cars, and countless small denials so they could retire with dignity. Richardson promised them conservative investments that would provide steady income for the rest of their lives. What would you have done if someone with Richardson's credentials and reputation asked to manage your life savings? Would you have spotted the red flags that were about to emerge? The warning signs were subtle at first. Richardson's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, noticed he'd started working odd hours, arriving early and staying late, long after the building's security guards had locked up. He said he was working on a big restructuring project for several major clients, Walsh later testified. I didn't think anything of it. He was always very dedicated. Security footage from this period shows Richardson entering the building at 5:30 a.m. and leaving well past 10 p.m. But investigators would later discover he wasn't managing client portfolios during these extended hours. He was systematically moving money between accounts, creating fictional investment vehicles, and forging documents to cover his tracks. Richardson's method was sophisticated and patient. Rather than stealing large sums that might trigger automatic alerts, he moved smaller amounts, typically between $25,000 and $75,000, from multiple client accounts into temporary holding accounts he'd created under false business names. These amounts were just below the bank's automatic fraud detection thresholds. The genius of his scheme was its gradual escalation. Month by month, Richardson grew bolder, moving larger sums more frequently. Client statements showed steady returns and growing balances, but the money backing those numbers was increasingly fictional. Richardson was running a private Ponzi scheme, using new client deposits to cover withdrawal requests from existing clients, while skimming millions for himself. During this period, Richardson's lifestyle began subtly expanding. The family's annual European vacation became a month-long tour of luxury resorts. Margaret Richardson's Tesla was joined by a $180,000 Porsche Cayenne for weekend trips. The couple purchased a $800,000 vacation home in Lake Tahoe, paying cash to avoid mortgage scrutiny. When colleagues asked about his apparent wealth, Richardson had ready explanations. Margaret's father left her some inheritance, he'd say, or, "We made some lucky real estate investments years ago." His explanations were vague enough to avoid details but specific enough to sound credible. But Richardson's hubris was growing dangerous. By September 2023, he was moving over $200,000 per week between accounts. The volume of his late-night activity had caught the attention of Frank Morrison, First National's head of security. Morrison noticed Richardson's key card was being used to access the building at unusual hours with increasing frequency. "At first, I thought maybe he was having marriage troubles, sleeping at the office," Morrison later explained. "But then I saw the pattern. Every time he came in late or early, there was significant computer activity in the wealth management system." Morrison's casual inquiry to Richardson about his hours received a smooth deflection. "Big restructuring project for the Henderson Family Trust," Richardson explained. "Very time-sensitive, very confidential. You know how these old money families are about privacy." The explanation satisfied Morrison temporarily, but planted a seed of suspicion that would soon grow into full investigation. What Richardson didn't realize was that his sophisticated scheme contained a fatal flaw. He'd grown too comfortable, too confident, and too greedy. The very success that made him trusted was about to become the evidence that would destroy him. The perfect facade was about to crumble. Richardson's criminal enterprise began not with a master plan, but with a moment of desperate opportunism in March 2021. His youngest daughter Emma had been accepted to Stanford University, a dream come true that came with a $75,000 annual price tag. Between tuition, his existing debts, and maintaining their lifestyle, Richardson faced a financial crisis that his salary couldn't solve. That's when he noticed the Henderson Trust account. The Henderson family had deposited $2.3 million following the sale of their family business, intending to let it grow conservatively while they decided on long-term investments. They were traveling in Europe for 6 months and had explicitly told Richardson they didn't want to be bothered with financial details during their trip. Richardson saw an opportunity. His first theft was modest. Just $15,000 transferred to a shell account he'd created under the name Riverside Investment Holdings. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd return the money before the Hendersons came back. But when they returned and requested an account summary, Richardson discovered how easy it was to create fictional investment statements showing their money was still there, even earning modest returns. The psychological barrier had been broken. Over the following 18 months, Richardson refined his method with the precision of a surgeon. He identified clients who checked their accounts infrequently, elderly retirees, busy professionals, people who trusted him completely. He created a network of shell companies with official-sounding names: Pacific Wealth Management, Golden State Investment Group, and California Retirement Solutions. Each shell company had its own bank account, business license, and even a basic website Richardson had built himself. To casual observers, these appeared to be legitimate investment firms partnering with First National. In reality, they were Richardson's personal slush funds. His technique was masterful in its simplicity. When a client wanted to make a withdrawal, Richardson would transfer money from another client's account to cover it, updating both sets of records to show everything was legitimate. When new money came in, he'd skim a percentage while investing the rest genuinely, ensuring that client statements showed realistic returns. But Richardson's personal spending was accelerating dangerously. The Porsche was just the beginning. Bank records would later reveal a shopping spree that included $45,000 worth of jewelry for Margaret's birthday, a $120,000 boat moored at Marina del Rey, and a $60,000 wine collection stored in a climate-controlled cellar he'd built in their Tahoe home. Each purchase was justified to his wife as the result of excellent investment returns or unexpected bonuses. Richardson's children noticed the changes too. Emma's Stanford tuition was paid in full each semester, no questions asked. Her twin sister Sophie was planning an expensive semester abroad in France, with Richardson encouraging her to dream big and not worry about costs. To his family, Thomas Richardson appeared to be the ultimate provider, but maintaining this illusion required increasingly sophisticated deception. By 2022, Richardson was managing 14 different shell accounts, each containing stolen funds from various clients. He'd created elaborate spreadsheets tracking which money came from which victims, ensuring he could cover withdrawal requests without detection. The complexity of his scheme had grown beyond anything he'd originally imagined. His closest call came in June 2022, when Eleanor Martinez requested a $100,000 withdrawal to help her grandson purchase his first home. Richardson's books showed her account contained $1.4 million, but the actual available funds were only $180,000. To cover the withdrawal, he had to quickly move money from 3 other client accounts, creating a chain reaction that nearly exposed the entire scheme. Richardson later described this moment to investigators as terrifying and admitted he considered confessing everything. Instead, he chose to double down. That summer, Richardson took the ultimate risk. He began moving money internationally. Using contacts from his legitimate investment work, he opened accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, transferring over $800,000 to offshore accounts for tax optimization purposes. In reality, he was creating his exit strategy. The offshore transfers revealed Richardson's true intentions. This was no longer about covering family expenses or maintaining their lifestyle. He was planning to disappear. But Richardson's hubris had reached dangerous levels. In August 2023, he purchased a $1.2 million villa in Costa Rica under a shell company name, ostensibly as a client investment property. He began learning Spanish through an app on his phone and researched countries without extradition treaties with the United States. Richardson was preparing to abandon his family, his clients, and his entire life to escape with approximately $4.1 million in stolen funds. His wife Margaret remained completely unaware. When she asked about their sudden wealth, Richardson's explanations had evolved into elaborate stories about cryptocurrency investments and hedge fund partnerships that were too complex for her to understand. He'd trained her not to ask detailed questions about his work, claiming client confidentiality prevented him from sharing specifics. The psychological profile that emerged during Richardson's trial painted a picture of a man whose self-worth had become entirely tied to his ability to provide luxury for his family. Court-appointed psychiatrist Dr. Sarah Bradley testified that Richardson exhibited classic narcissistic traits combined with what she termed provider complex, an obsessive need to be seen as successful regardless of the cost. Thomas convinced himself that his family deserved a lifestyle beyond his legitimate means. Dr. Bradley explained. In his mind, he wasn't stealing. He was fulfilling his role as the perfect father and husband. The cognitive dissonance required enormous mental energy to maintain. By September 2023, Richardson was moving over $300,000 per month through his network of shell accounts. The volume had grown so large that he'd started making deposits and transfers during overnight hours to avoid scrutiny from other bank employees. Security cameras captured him entering the building at all hours, sometimes staying until 3 a.m. to manage his increasingly complex web of deception. What Richardson didn't know was that Frank Morrison had begun tracking his unusual hours and cross-referencing them with computer system activity logs. A pattern was emerging that would soon expose everything. The unraveling began with a single phone call. On September 28, 2023, Robert Chen called Richardson's office to discuss a large withdrawal. Chen wanted to give $500,000 to his daughter to help her purchase a home in San Francisco's competitive market. It was money he'd been planning to leave her in his will, but rising home prices made him want to help her immediately. Richardson's stomach dropped. Chen's account showed a balance of $3.1 million, but Richardson knew the actual available funds were less than $400,000. To cover Chen's withdrawal, he would need to liquidate positions from at least 6 other client accounts, creating a paper trail that bank auditors would inevitably discover. For the first time in 30 months of deception, Thomas Richardson had encountered a withdrawal request he couldn't cover without exposing his entire scheme. He told Chen he needed a few days to optimize the tax implications of such a large withdrawal and promised to call him back with a plan. Richardson spent that night staring at his computer screen, running calculations he knew were hopeless. His empire of lies was about to collapse, but Richardson's desperation led to his most reckless decision yet. Rather than confess or attempt to cover Chen's withdrawal legitimately, Richardson decided to accelerate his exit strategy. On October 2, 2023, he initiated a wire transfer of $1.8 million to his Cayman Islands account, planning to flee the country within 48 hours. This transfer would trigger the automatic fraud detection systems he'd so carefully avoided for over 2 years. At 2:17 a.m. on October 3, 2023, First National's automated monitoring system flagged Richardson's $1.8 million wire transfer as suspicious and immediately froze the transaction. By 6 a.m., the bank's fraud investigation team was examining Richardson's account activity. What they discovered shocked even seasoned financial investigators. In 25 years of banking, I'd never seen a scheme this sophisticated operated by a single individual. Lead investigator Patricia Hayes later testified. Richardson had essentially created his own private bank within our bank, complete with fake companies, forged documents, and a complex network of accounts that took our team 3 months to fully untangle. The scope of Richardson's deception was breathtaking. Over 31 months, he had stolen approximately $4.3 million from 47 different client accounts, created 18 shell companies, and forged hundreds of documents including investment statements, transfer authorizations, and compliance reports. But investigators discovered something even more disturbing. Richardson had been planning his escape for over a year. Hidden in his home office, FBI agents found detailed plans for his disappearance, including fake identification documents, flight itineraries to Costa Rica, and research on countries without extradition treaties. Richardson had been prepared to abandon his wife and daughters, leaving them to face the consequences of his crimes while he lived comfortably in exile. The investigation revealed that Richardson's wife and children were genuinely unaware of his criminal activity. Margaret Richardson had trusted her husband completely, never questioning the source of their sudden wealth or his explanations about successful investments. Their daughters had simply enjoyed the benefits of their father's success, unaware that their college tuition and luxury vacations were funded by elderly retirees' life savings. When confronted with evidence of his crimes, Richardson's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. On October 5, 2023, FBI agents arrested Thomas Richardson in his office at First National Bank as he attempted to delete files from his computer. Security footage shows Richardson calmly putting on his suit jacket and walking to the elevator with agents, maintaining his composure even as his world collapsed around him. But the investigation was far from over. Authorities needed to understand the full scope of Richardson's crimes and identify every victim whose life savings had been stolen. The confrontation came at 9:42 a.m. on October 5, 2023, when FBI Special Agent Linda Torres knocked on the glass door of Richardson's corner office. Through the window, she could see him frantically clicking through computer files, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his hands trembling as he attempted to delete evidence of his crimes. "Thomas Richardson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and theft," Agent Torres announced as she entered with 2 other agents. Richardson looked up from his computer screen, and for the first time in 31 months, his mask of professional confidence completely disappeared. "I want to call my lawyer," were his only words. But the evidence against Richardson was overwhelming. FBI forensic accountants had spent 72 hours analyzing every transaction in his network of shell accounts, creating a digital trail that documented each theft down to the penny. They'd discovered forged signatures, fabricated investment statements, and a web of lies so complex that it took a team of 12 investigators 3 weeks to fully unravel. Richardson's arrest sent shockwaves through Riverside's financial community. Local news cameras captured him being led from First National Bank in handcuffs, his perfectly pressed suit a stark contrast to the federal agents surrounding him. Clients who had trusted him with their life savings gathered outside the bank, some crying, others shouting accusations as Richardson was driven away. Eleanor Martinez was among those watching. The 78-year-old retired nurse had to be supported by her nephew as she realized that the man she'd treated like family had stolen her entire retirement fund. 40 years of night shifts, she whispered to reporters. 40 years of saving every penny, and he took it all. The human cost of Richardson's crimes became clear as investigators contacted each victim. Robert Chen learned that his $2.8 million retirement fund had been reduced to $340,000. James and Patricia Williams discovered that their lifetime of savings, $1.9 million, existed only on paper. The actual remaining balance was $127,000. 47 families faced financial ruin because one man had decided his family's luxury was worth more than their security. Richardson's family faced their own devastating revelation. When FBI agents arrived at their $2.8 million estate with search warrants, Margaret Richardson learned for the first time that their entire lifestyle had been built on stolen money. The Porsche, the boat, the vacation home in Tahoe, her daughter's college tuition, everything had been purchased with money stolen from elderly retirees and hardworking families. "I trusted him completely," Margaret Richardson told investigators through tears. "I believed everything he told me about investments and bonuses. I never questioned where the money came from because I never imagined he could do something like this." Their daughters, Emma and Sophie, faced their own crisis. Emma's Stanford education would have to be suspended. The family could no longer afford tuition. Sophie's semester abroad in France was canceled. Both young women, honor students who had never known financial stress, suddenly faced the reality that their father was a criminal and their family was bankrupt. But Richardson's legal troubles were just beginning. Federal prosecutors charged him with 47 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of money laundering, and multiple counts of investment advisor fraud. Each wire fraud count carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. The total potential sentence exceeded 800 years. Richardson's defense team, led by prominent white-collar criminal attorney David Sterling, initially considered fighting the charges. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Every transaction was documented, every forged signature analyzed, every victim impact clear and devastating. Sterling advised Richardson to negotiate a plea agreement. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos, was initially reluctant to offer any deal. This defendant violated the trust of vulnerable elderly victims, Santos argued in court filings. He stole their life savings to fund his luxury lifestyle, then planned to flee the country and abandon his own family to escape consequences. This is exactly the type of case that demands maximum punishment. But Richardson held one crucial card: the location of money he'd hidden offshore. During plea negotiations, Richardson revealed that approximately $1.8 million remained in Cayman Islands and Swiss accounts he'd established. Recovery of these funds could provide some restitution to victims, but only if Richardson cooperated fully with authorities. The math was brutal but simple. Without Richardson's cooperation, victims would recover nothing. With his cooperation, they might recover 40% of their stolen money. On March 15, 2024, Thomas Richardson appeared in federal court wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his customary $3,000 suits. Before Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to victim Robert Chen, Richardson formally pleaded guilty to 23 felony counts related to his crimes. The plea hearing revealed the full scope of Richardson's betrayal. Standing before his victims' families, Richardson was required to acknowledge each crime individually. For nearly an hour, he admitted to stealing specific amounts from specific victims: $180,000 from Eleanor Martinez, $240,000 from the Williams family, $190,000 from Robert Chen. Eleanor Martinez attended the hearing despite her age and declining health. When Richardson acknowledged stealing her retirement savings, she whispered, "You were like family to me." Words that visibly shook the defendant, who had maintained stoic composure throughout the proceedings. But the most devastating moment came when Richardson admitted to planning his escape to Costa Rica. Prosecutor Santos presented evidence that Richardson had researched his family's financial situation after his planned disappearance, calculating that his wife would need to sell their home and cars to cover basic living expenses while he lived comfortably in exile. The defendant was prepared to condemn his own family to poverty while he enjoyed stolen millions in a foreign country, Santos told the court. This level of selfishness and cruelty demands severe punishment. Richardson's sentencing hearing on June 8, 2024, drew over 100 people to the federal courthouse. Victim after victim took the stand to describe how Richardson's crimes had destroyed their lives. Eleanor Martinez, now 79 and facing the possibility of losing her modest apartment, told the judge, "I worked night shifts for 40 years. I saved every penny. I trusted Thomas with everything I had because he seemed like such a good man. Now I don't know how I'll pay rent next month." Robert Chen's victim impact statement was equally devastating. "My wife and I worked 16-hour days for 35 years. We delayed having children until we were financially stable. We never took expensive vacations or bought luxury cars because we were saving for retirement. Thomas Richardson stole our future." James Williams, now 73, spoke for his wife Patricia, who was too distraught to testify. "We trusted Thomas because he seemed to care about us personally. He asked about our grandchildren, remembered our anniversary, sent us Christmas cards. All while he was stealing our life savings. The betrayal is almost worse than the financial loss." But perhaps the most powerful statement came from Richardson's own daughter, Emma, who had learned that her Stanford education was funded by stolen money from people like Eleanor Martinez. "I am ashamed to be Thomas Richardson's daughter," Emma told the court. "I am horrified that my education was paid for with money stolen from elderly people who trusted my father. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what he did." Richardson himself offered a brief statement before sentencing. "I have no excuse for what I did. I betrayed the trust of people who deserved better. I destroyed my family's future and the futures of 47 families who trusted me. I will spend every day for the rest of my life regretting my choices." Judge Chen's sentencing was swift and severe. Thomas Richardson violated the most fundamental principle of his profession, the duty to protect his client's interests above his own, Judge Chen declared. He targeted vulnerable elderly victims, stealing their life savings to fund a luxury lifestyle. Most despicably, he planned to abandon his own family to escape consequences while living comfortably on stolen money. This court sentences Thomas Richardson to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He is ordered to pay $4.3 million in restitution to his victims and forfeit all assets purchased with stolen funds. The sentence effectively meant Richardson, now 48, would spend the rest of his productive adult life in prison. Asset forfeiture proceedings quickly followed. The $2.8 million estate was sold at auction, along with the Porsche, the boat, and the Tahoe vacation home. Margaret Richardson and her daughters were forced to move into a modest apartment, their privileged lifestyle permanently shattered. Recovery efforts managed to locate $1.9 million in offshore accounts Richardson had established. Combined with asset sales, approximately $2.7 million was available for victim restitution, roughly 60% of the stolen funds. While this provided some relief to Richardson's victims, many still faced severe financial hardship. Eleanor Martinez received $108,000 of her stolen $180,000, forcing her to move to a subsidized housing facility. Robert Chen recovered $1.68 million of his $2.8 million retirement fund, requiring him to return to work at age 66. The ripple effects of Richardson's crimes extended far beyond his direct victims. First National Bank faced regulatory scrutiny and lawsuits from clients who questioned how such extensive fraud could occur undetected. The bank ultimately settled class action lawsuits for $12 million and implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar crimes. Richardson's case also prompted changes in federal banking regulations. the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network updated reporting requirements for wealth management firms, implementing new safeguards designed to detect the type of shell company scheme Richardson had used. Today, Thomas Richardson serves his 25-year sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Victorville, a medium-security prison in California's Mojave Desert. Bureau of Prisons records show he works in the prison's accounting office, earning $0.23 per hour, a far cry from his former $180,000 salary. His wife Margaret has returned to nursing, working night shifts at a local hospital to support herself and her daughters. Emma eventually returned to Stanford after receiving need-based financial aid, graduating with a degree in social work with a focus on elder abuse prevention. Sophie chose to attend community college and now works as a victims advocate with the district attorney's office. Richardson's victims have shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding their lives. Eleanor Martinez, now 80, volunteers with AARP to educate seniors about financial fraud. Robert Chen used his experience to create a non-profit organization that provides financial literacy education to immigrant communities. The Williams family has become advocates for stronger financial oversight regulations. But the trust that Richardson shattered can never be fully restored. They thought they'd get away with the perfect crime, but Richardson discovered what every criminal eventually learns. No scheme is foolproof, no deception lasts forever, and justice, while sometimes delayed, is ultimately inevitable. If stories like this fascinate you, tales of financial fraud, broken trust, and justice finally served, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit that like button if this story left you satisfied that justice was done. Subscribe to join our growing community of viewers who can't get enough of watching the privileged fall. And share this with someone who needs to hear that no matter how untouchable they seem, justice always finds a way. What detail in this case shocked you the most? What red flags do you think people should have noticed? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to share your theories about similar cases you've heard about. What true crime story should we uncover next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, they thought they'd get away, but they never do.